Hello, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. We are now joined by Commissioner Carolyn Crenshaw. The Honorable Crenshaw was appointed to the Commission in 2020. She has been a longtime investor advocate, and she is someone who I consider personally to be a friend from her service on the Veterans Committee as our executive sponsor. So, ma'am, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. As I mentioned over the break, we've had a really great session so far, and we've got two more exciting panels coming up. So let me turn the floor over to you.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it. And I'm delighted to be speaking to you all here today. And I want to make sure to thank Christina and her team, Adam, and everyone else included in the Office of the Investor Advocate for inviting me to say a few words and for putting on this important event. So, for all of you, what an interesting time to be getting into the law. It's a time of change, friction, volatility, of testing the outermost limits of our laws. And frankly, it's a time where we are rediscovering our character as a nation. The first thing that I would like to impress upon you is that the legal profession upon which you embark is one of profound importance. Always, but especially now. The rule of law is the foundation of our social contract. As we navigate turbulent waters, we need energetic, impassioned, and principled lawyers to advocate not only on behalf of their clients, but also on behalf of the law itself, the Constitution, our democratic institutions, and our framework of checks and balances. You will take an oath upon entering the profession, which requires you to support the Constitution of the United States and faithfully discharge your duties as an attorney. Doing so today will require grit, toughness, and integrity. But this is a task well worth undertaking, and in doing so, you will follow in a long and storied profession. This leads me to my second point. Part of our great American tradition today has become free and fair markets for all investors. That includes small investors, people who have invested their savings into the market in the hope of a safe and prosperous future, or even newer, younger investors who seek to generate wealth by investing in potentially new and emerging technologies or markets. Advocacy on behalf of these investors and the integrity of the markets themselves is an important endeavor. There are undercurrents in today's markets that make investing potentially more risky and less transparent than it has been in the past. First, investors will have access to less transparent markets. There has been an orchestrated push to open access to private markets to more investors, potentially including investors who cannot afford the substantial losses that often accompany investing in newer ventures. These markets are less regulated and require fewer and less consistent disclosures. Second, there will be less accountability. Pushes to dull the tools that the SEC can deploy to punish wrongdoers, such as by reducing civil penalties, disgorgement, or other remedies, will make wrongdoing less costly. Third, we will deregulate with haste. As we have seen already, staff have already issued in the past 2 months alone multiple pieces of significant guidance which purport to reduce the SEC's jurisdiction and diminish investor protections. Fourth, AI and other technologies, though beneficial in many, many ways, will create new opportunities for fraud and scammers. Finally, resources for the SEC and other government actors who oversee the markets have diminished precipitously over the past 2 months and probably will continue to decrease. These trends, I fear, undermine our tradition of fair markets and imperil the path of the small investor. In this environment, investors will need not only education about products, investor rights, and markets, they will also need skilled advocates. And that's where you come in. It's a big task, but one I feel confident that the next generation of attorneys is ready to undertake. I hope everyone will enjoy today's session and good luck on navigating the turbulent waters ahead. Thank you. I think I'm supposed to turn it over to Jackie.
Yes. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all are enjoying the summit, as I definitely am. At this time, I would like to introduce Paul Salisky from the Office of Investor Education and Advocacy, and he is going to be hosting the Cyber and Emerging Technologies panel. Over to you, Paul.
Well, thank you very much. Well, hello, my name is Paul Solsky. I serve as a senior counsel in the SEC's Office of Investor Education and Advocacy. As a representative of the Office of Investor Education, I feel it is my duty to point out that we are holding this summit during the National Financial Literacy Month. And I would further note that from listening to today's panels, that I see a major underlying theme in today's student presentation to be the critical importance of investor education in today's complex financial environment, not only as an essential component in protecting investors, but also, to quote Chairman Ueda, to ensure investors have an opportunity to reach their personal financial goals while also playing a role in capital formation, which is what makes our economy so dynamic. So let's turn to our next presentation, which is on cyber and emerging technologies in light of this idea. So let's go. So first we have Michael Martinez, Olive Moynier, and Carson Tate McNabb from Cornell Law School, and they will be talking about AI and machine learning. Over to you.
Thank you, Paul, for the introduction and for moderating this segment. We're honored to be here today at the summit, and it's been a pleasure hearing from other speakers, and we sincerely thank the SEC for this opportunity. Today, we'll be discussing AI and machine learning and securities fraud, and we'll start by introducing ourselves. So my name is Olive Monnier, and I'm here with Carson McNabb and Michael Martinez. We're all students at the Cornell Law School Securities Clinic. A little bit about our clinic. We primarily represent securities investors in FINRA arbitration, particularly those in rural region of upstate New York. In addition to direct client representation, we also engage in regulatory advocacy by submitting comment letters to the SEC, FINRA, the ABA, and also through amicus briefs, including filings before the U.S. Supreme Court. Recently, we submitted a letter to the ABA urging them to amend Model Rule 5.5, which restricts the multi-jurisdictional practice of law. As written, the rule currently creates an undue barrier for a securities clinic like ours to represent small investors across state lines. This restriction presents a significant obstacles to access justice, particularly for underserved investors who may have nowhere else to turn. To the topic at hand, AI and machine learning related securities fraud is still an emerging area, and we have not yet encountered clients directly affected by it. It is something we're eager to engage with, and our presentation today reflects a deep dive into the topic, combining legal research with our experience representing everyday investors. The definition of AI, artificial intelligence or AI, is incredibly complex, and even among experts, there is no single agreed upon meaning. This reflects the current state of the field. It's fragmented, it's evolving, and it's highly technical. Different sources define AI in different ways, but through all the variation, we've noticed some common and shared characteristics, including adaptivity, which is the ability to learn and improve from data. We've seen content generation, especially with generative AI models. We've also seen autonomy, which is a system's ability to act independently of human input. However, just a few weeks ago, the SEC held an artificial intelligence roundtable, and Professor Hilary Allen, a professor at American University, suggested that a useful way to understand AI is through the lens of applied statistics. AI tools, particularly machine learning models, are algorithms searching for patterns in data and then use those patterns to perform ISAN tasks such as prediction or classification. We thought this framing is not only accessible, but also captures the core functionality of how AI operates in the real-world financial systems. Our presentation today divides AI-related securities fraud into two broad categories. First is AI as an enticement. This is when fraudsters use the idea of AI by promising AI-driven returns or promoting investments in so-called AI-powered platforms to lure investors. And the second category is AI as a facilitator. And here, AI is actively used to carry out the fraud. We see this through deep fakes, voice cloning, chatbots, and so on. Now, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Michael Martinez, who will tell us more about AI as an enticement in traditional securities fraud.
Thank you all. Let's see. Okay, So the SEC's action in Securities and Exchange Commission v. Gagiri is really a paradigmatic example of what we've termed AI as an enticement in traditional securities fraud. This enforcement action demonstrates the interchangeable role artificial intelligence enticements play in traditional securities fraud. And in Gagiri, the targets of the SEC's investigation were 3 pump and dump operations. One was an ostensible digital media company, one a cannabis technology company, and one a biotechnology wearables company. The biotechnology wearables company was named Kelvin Medical Incorporated, or KVMD. In the pump phase of KVMD's pump and dump operation, KVMD's undisclosed control person, defendant Gannon Gagiri, claimed that KVMD was, quote, leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning combined with the latest advancements in monitoring and therapeutic delivery technologies to increase the recovery and performance of the human body. However, the SEC's complaint notes that KVMD had taken no such steps to leveraging AI this way, and in fact did not possess the resources to even attempt such a feat. Indeed, KVMD's nominal CEO told Gagiri that while the AI promises sounded good, the CEO had, quote, no idea what it all meant. So Gagiri promulgated the AI lie both through a Form 8K that he caused KVMD to issue in January 2018 and through a January 29th post on themoneystreet.com, a website defending Gagiri controlled, titled, Can Machine Learning Actually Predict Therapeutic Results? Approximately 3 months after issuing the fraudulent Form 8K and his post on themoneystreet.com, the defendants began the dump phase of the KVMD pump and dump operation, selling off stock until March 19th, 2018, when the SEC suspended KVMD trading. So the fact that AI played only a role in KVMD's misrepresentations and not the other 2 companies targeted in the SEC's enforcement actions, we think demonstrates AI's interchangeability or fungibility in traditional securities fraud. And this is really why we've chosen to highlight the Gagiri case. While there is an array of similar cases, we think that this action in particular shows that there is nothing particularly unique about AI enticements. This pattern finds a more recent iteration in United States v. Kovar. In Kovar, the Department of Justice alleges that defendant Brent Kovar operated a Ponzi scheme, a company called Profit Connect, and in doing so made a series of fantastical promises, including but not limited to a 15 to 30% fixed rate for investors, a 100% money-back guarantee, and the use of artificial intelligence for cryptocurrency mining. And interestingly, the DOJ's press release notes that Kovar is supposed to stand trial today, April 8th. And turning briefly to state enforcement actions, on April 19th, 2023, the California State Securities Regulator, the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation, or DFPI, brought a slew of enforcement actions against individuals and entities offering allegedly fraudulent AI investments. In these cases, the DFPI identified the alleged investment scams as conventional scams that simply used AI as an enticement. For example, in one action, the DFPI alleged that Coinbot, a business entity selling securities in California, promised to profitably conduct cryptocurrency trading for investors and promised daily profits ranging from 1.5 to 6%. The DFPI identified this as a conventional high-yield investment program, or HYIP, that the DFPI noted are often frauds. The DFPI brought nearly identical actions against sellers MaxSpread, Harvest Keeper, Quant Fund, and Vis Capital, whose fraudulent offerings are pictured here. And I will now turn it over to Carson.
Thank you, Michael. So beyond luring investors with AI hype, fraudsters are now using AI and machine learning to carry out traditional scams, as Michael just pointed out, but more efficiently, and in ways that outsmart even cautious targets. So fraudsters use this technology in 3 main ways on the screen here. The first is advanced targeting, and then the second is impersonations, deepfakes, voice cloning, etc. And the third is chatbots, which we'll get into, soliciting versus support. So what do I mean by advanced targeting? So fraudsters can use AI to analyze network traffic, identifying vulnerabilities or patterns in trading systems to exploit. Tools like Fraud GPT, a dark web large language model, expedite phishing campaigns tailored to individual investors or companies. So these are the kinds of risks that are unique to AI. But as we mentioned, some of these are more traditional scams. So, for example, mimicry and impersonations are a tool to carry out traditional scams by sort of tricking investors into investing in pump and dumps, for example. So, what is voice cloning? Voice cloning creates or modifies a subject's voice based on a voice sample. For example, the top photo on the right here actually comes from Speechify, which can scan text and then read it out to you in whatever voice you want. So I personally, during my 1.0 year, I had Snoop Dogg doing my readings for me, which was it helped. And nowadays, it's getting more sophisticated, so they can actually create generated voices without a sample that comes from a real person. So unique risks there. Another way of mimicry or impersonation is deep fakes, which more people have heard about. These are digitally altered videos made by mapping one's facial movements onto a subject's facial features. Um, so right here on the right is Jordan Peele and BuzzFeed created this video to bring attention to the growing problem of fake online information. So you see there, Jordan Peele is actually the one doing the speaking here and doing the movements, but they mapped it onto Barack Obama to make it look like this was a video made by Barack Obama. And all it took was Adobe After Effects and an AI program called Fake App. So this is the kinds of risks we're talking about to carry out traditional scams. And here's an example of that as well. Nowadays they just kind of lump all this in together and call it a deep fake because the voice cloning and the video technology just meshes right together. Scammers take advantage of the ethos of recognizable figures to lure investors into too good to be true investment opportunities. So tech has been mixed and mashed, and this is the result. This is a fake YouTube video live stream of an Elon Musk deep fake promoting cryptocurrency in too good to be true opportunities, like I mentioned. And of course, these links will just lead to malicious websites where the scams really take place. So chatbots. Chatbots are a computer program that uses artificial intelligence to imitate a conversation with a real person. Nowadays, it's not just the chat GPT thing you've seen where they give a paragraph to you and you can read it. You can actually talk to a real person or what it sounds like a real person. This is an example of like their new voice model, Juniper, it seems. And these language models are becoming more sophisticated and presenting obviously risks like soliciting chatbots, which are large language models which can be used to fully automate the traditional scams we've talked about. So these kinds of chatbots, soliciting chatbots, solicit investors with a mask of professionalism, bringing to the table, too good to be true investment opportunities. Once again, you're seeing a common theme here. This on the right is actually a group chat I was added to, and I censored the photos a bit just in case they use someone real. But it was clearly sketchy. All the red flags are there. You can see links to foreign websites, promises of 30% profits, and all the supposed customers that were very interested in what this financial advisor had to say. They all had the same profile photo and names like Hiftivaba and Kayla. They're all just old men in suits. So the problem here is that chatbots can really take what some people seem to be obvious scams and not only personalize them, but automate them, which brings significant risks. There are other kinds of chatbots, support chatbots that are a risk. And these draw upon these sort of traditional scams that you've seen in your inbox, such as here. I got a order for $500 saying that I bought a bunch of Bitcoin and I didn't. And then they gave me in big, bold, orange letters, call this number and we'll help you sort this out if there's any issues. So these support chatbots draw upon, sort of persona of large companies. And so chatbot adoption by legitimate financial institutions is making this a bigger problem. According to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the top 10 largest commercial banks have deployed chatbots. and 37% of the US population have been exposed to chatbots. So this sort of process of going to a support to what you think is legitimate support can it's not only automated as we've seen before, automated scams. It's narrowing the allowable responses from the target victim as well, especially when you have like those kinds of support scenarios where you only have like you can only press like 3 buttons when you respond, or else you have to ask to talk to a real person, which you never can. So these are the kinds of things we're talking about. So now I'm moving it on to Olive to talk about the sort of regulatory side of this.
Yeah, so we've explored different ways AI has been used to facilitate fraud. It's also important to recognize that regulators aren't ignoring the risks, they're responding in real time. And this slide just shows a handful of recent headlines that reflect the growing urgency. I mean, we have the SEC in February 2025, that's this year, announcing the creation of a dedicated cyber and emerging technologies unit. And I mean, this just shows that the SEC has an ongoing commitment to the issues intersecting with technology and finance. I mean, the issues revolving AI and security fraud is not speculative, it's real. And so investors and financial institutions have to stay proactive. And now we'll take any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was fascinating and a very interesting look at the potential, what we have to look at and look for in this new world of AI and machine learning. Now, I'm going to stay in with our time. I'm going to move on to our next panel. So I'm not going to ask the students directly any questions, but maybe just leave one out for everyone to consider as we go home today and start thinking about this. Which is because I've worked in this area for years. First, helping out the SEC in international cross-border scams, and then now as a investor education. But a lot of these scams that we heard from today on this AI side were still your pump and dumps and false disclosure and potentially kind of confusing people about who you really are talking to. So is this, as our previous panel, just new wine in old skins? Or is there something particularly new, unique that we have to think about in addressing fraud in this world of AI? So I'll leave everyone to think about that. And let's move to our next panel, which is with our students from Cardozo. And that would be, I'll let them introduce themselves just to speed things up. And they will be covering case studies on cyber-based imposter scam. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Gubner, and I am a student with the Cardozo Securities Arbitration Clinic, and we'll be talking about the rise of cyber-based imposter scams. Our presentation today will focus on 3 of our clients' stories and the different types of imposter scams they have fallen victim to. All 3 of them follow this basic structure. First, the scammer makes internet-based contact with the target. Second, the scammer pressures the target with incentives to invest money and continues to do so until the target stops sending or runs out of money. Third, the scammer stops responding to the target and absconds with the money, which results in an unrecoverable loss. The first case study involves one of our clients who got caught up in a multi-tier scam with an imposter investment company. The scammer first reached out to our client via WhatsApp. WhatsApp's end-to-end encryption makes it a favorite for scammers because there is no real way for the user to track where the messages are actually coming from. Next, the scammer made a connection to the client who thought she was getting an introduction through a mutual friend. The scammer made the connection, noting shared interests, friends, language, and background. The scammer said that they worked for an investment company and sent links to the company's website. The website looked like a real trading platform and had currency listings and stock prices streaming across the screen in real time. When our client logged into this website, she was given instructions as how to transfer funds. And then when she signed in after that, within a week, she saw what looked like significant returns. The scammer would reach out commenting on these significant returns and kept on pressuring our client to invest more. Once our client said that she had invested all of her funds, the scammer told her that she could earn 10% of the profits of anyone else she referred to the investment platform. Our client then invested all of her father's money in the platform as well. Once she tried to withdraw the money, the scammer told her that she would have to pay significant withdrawal fees because the money had only been in the investment account for a few weeks. Our client didn't have the money to pay these purported withdrawal fees, and she tried to negotiate with the scammer, but the scammer just stopped responding. The website was hosted in another country outside of the US. Its listed address, Manhattan, New York. Manhattan, New York is not a postal address. The proper address would be New York, New York. And in any event, it's listed no street number, suite number, or any other information for this company's purported office. There was no contact telephone number, just a form for contacting the company and a login button. Money was transferred through a cryptocurrency wallet. Our client missed all of these red flags. And by the time we pointed them out to her and searched for any records of the purported investment company, the scammers were gone and untraceable. While we were able to get the Attorney General's office to close the website down, neither they nor the FBI were able to trace the fund transfers. And the company hosting the website or the scammers. In other similar cases, we have seen websites simply just disappear. Our client not only lost her life savings, but lost the life savings of her elderly father as well.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Julia. Hi, my name is Penelope Foron, and I am also a clinical intern at Cardozo's Security Arbitration Clinic. In the cases we are discussing today, the investment platforms are fully online. The problem with any broker-dealer that is fully online, including registered entities, is that there is no brick and mortar storefront to walk into and get confirmation or direct help. It is notoriously difficult to reach a live person for help if you have an account with an online broker-dealer. Scammers know that, and they seize on the opportunity to make sure they are the first person to show up in Google search results for these firms. Here's an example. One of our clients was having trouble accessing his online brokerage account on his computer. The only way to reach someone was through his brokerage firm's app. Unable to get help through the app, he searched for the company's number on the internet. Google's top search result provided a telephone number emblazoned with the company's official corporate logo and linked to its website and stock ticker information. Our client then called the number provided by Google. The scammer that picked up was very knowledgeable about the investment platform and its interface. The support person also told our client that in order to help him, he needed to download additional software onto his phone. The scammer then told the client that in order to verify his identity, he needed to open up a gold card with the broker-dealer, and it would be linked to his existing investment account. The scammer convinced our client to transfer $5,000, which would give him certain benefits, and then another $5,000 transfer for additional benefits, perks, and credits. Our client believed that these transfers were between internal accounts, but shortly after the scam, he saw that the $10,000 had actually been transferred out of his account. As soon as our client realized this, he tried to contact the brokerage firm's customer support to stop the transfer. He was unable to contact a live representative, and it took hours for the firm to respond. The transfers were made in quick succession to an unverified debit card. Despite repeated requests, the brokerage firm refuses to provide our client with information as to where the money was sent. Our client still has not recovered his lost $10,000, and there is no way for him to trace the scammers involved. Additionally, because of the software he downloaded, his information may have been further compromised, and he is at risk of being victimized by other scams.
Thank you, Penny. Hello, everyone. My name is Hussein Syed, and I'm also a clinical intern at Cardozo's Securities Arbitration Clinic. I'll be talking about our next case study on social media imposters. Here, our client was a middle-aged man, married with 2 children. He had no financial education, no investment experience, but he was looking to invest in cryptocurrencies and Forex. Notably, this is during the COVID pandemic, so face-to-face interaction was minimal to non-existent. Our client did some research on how and where to begin investing and came across an investment advisor who was also an alleged Bitcoin expert. The purported expert's Instagram page had over 10,000 followers and showed good engagement across all of her posts. The Instagram page also had a link to her CRD credentials on BrokerCheck, which showed 20 plus years of experience in the industry with no disciplinary record at all. He did some further research into the advisor and even called the investment firm that she actually worked at to confirm her legitimacy. From the outside, she looked like a fully legitimate advisor, but in reality, it was a scammer using this real investment advisor's information to pose as her. Convinced that the advisor was real, our client then began communicating with the scammer. The scammer had our client create an account on the website that allowed investors to deposit their money and then have it be managed by a broker. Notably, all communications here occurred through WhatsApp. Over time, the scammer convinced our client to give more money to increase returns for broker fees, for tax purposes, premium memberships, and other such reasons. A few months in, our client had given approximately $18,000, which was all of the savings. The scammer had told our client that the trading had resulted in profits of approximately $150,000. But in order to withdraw the money, our client would have to pay an alleged 10% delivery fee. When our client said that he quite literally had no money left to pay, the scammer heavily pushed our client to take out a loan. Ultimately, when our client refused, the scammer cut off all communication and shut off access to the client's investment account. On these next slides, we'll show you a few actual examples of communications between our client and the scammer from WhatsApp. In this first example, we can see our scammer inviting our client to invest more money with the promise of highly unrealistic returns. Here, the scammer states if our client invested just $1,200 more, he can make profits of over $80,000 within just 4 days. This next example shows the scammer's unwillingness to communicate in any forms outside of WhatsApp. Our client asks the scammer to answer some questions over the phone. And the scammer essentially says that they work all day and they don't have any time when they're not working because, the only free time they have is when they sleep and rest. So there's no time to talk. And this final example shows interactions when our client tried to withdraw his alleged $150,000 in profits. The scammer told our client that he had to pay 10% of the withdrawal amount in order to get his money. And again, when our client said they had no money left because they used all their savings and extra money for these investments, the scammer, kept pushing our client to take out a loan. And ultimately, when he refused, the scammer cut off all communications and fully disappeared.
Thank you, Hussein. My name is Kirsten Ebenezer, and I will be discussing some investor protection strategies for the kinds of cases we just outlined. Fraudulent activities are increasingly sophisticated and target vulnerable populations. Traditional enforcement methods alone are insufficient to protect investors because so many of these transactions involve untraceable communications originating in other countries, disappearing websites, and are made in untraceable cryptocurrency transactions. Accordingly, we need to develop targeted outreach strategies to provide information to individuals at risk of being scammed. As a clinic, we face significant challenges addressing these frauds after the fact. We do not have the funds for the forensic accounting and the cyber fraud expertise necessary to prosecute these cases. The funds are often transferred internationally or in cryptocurrency transactions, and the money is transmitted and withdrawn in seconds. As a clinic, we provide community-based education. We focus on venues like schools, senior centers, and community centers. We're able to tailor our presentations for the specific demographic group we are addressing. Ultimately, our clients may have missed red flags because they didn't know what to look for. We have ways of highlighting them for people in our community grassroots level. Accordingly, our presentations cover certain warning signs in proposed investment schemes. We tell people what signs to look for to identify cyber fraud. We show people how to verify whether a website is hosted in the US. We show them how to check whether a firm or person is registered with FINRA or with the SEC, and then ways to confirm whether a caller is who they say they are. We warn against communicating with purported investment professionals through end-to-end encrypted apps like WhatsApp or WeChat. We caution against allowing others to take control of personal devices and instruct them to not share passwords, access codes, identity verification codes, social security numbers, or birth dates. Any questions?
Yeah, well, I have a question, although we need to hurry, but as a member of the SEC's Office of Investor Education, I of course completely agree with the importance of your recommendation of an increased investor education. And so the SEC are continuing increasing our education, including our outreach to communities through our outreach education efforts. I think goes right along with that. But do you have any other thoughts on what the SEC should do to combat these types of frauds that you've highlighted?
Yes, Paul. So, given the fact that SEC has such a national platform, it might be helpful if the SEC has a broader social media presence. Although we see apps like Instagram and TikTok that they're not perfect platforms, with proper messaging, they can be effective tools to help the SEC prevent imposter investment scams. And the SEC can also provide specific alerts. If we look to the EasyPass website, it provides a good example. EasyPass prominently displays fraud warnings on the first page of its website. And EasyPass's latest warning is helpful to people who get fraudulent texts from scammers pretending to be EasyPass, asking for personal information to pay fake tolls. So, broker dealers and the commission could take a similar proactive approach to better protect people from these frauds. So, once there is notice of a particular fraud, the SEC could do a quick video about the alleged fraudulent practice and post it online. And no specific entity or investigation needs to be identified for this.
Oh, excellent. Thank you very much for that. We do have, staff here who are focused on our social media work, and I know they'll take those thoughts and they are working hard to try to figure out within the constraints that we have as a federal law enforcement agency and legal requirements for due process, et cetera. They are trying as hard as they can, but we'll see. Hopefully, we will be able to accentuate and expand our use of social media to help combat these kind of frauds. All right, let's turn to our last group. This would be Chen Yu Chen and Kei Kyung Un Hyo from Northwestern, and they will talk about the pitfalls in crypto investing.
Hi, hello everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak at this conference. My name is Qianyu Chen, and my partner Kay and I are from Northwestern's Complex Civil Litigation and Investor Protection Center, and we work with Professor Tenenbaum, and we will share the pitfalls of crypto investment and some fraud and post-fraud cases. Next slide, please. So first, we got high volatility. Crypto's prices are known to fluctuate dramatically, and this can lead to substantial gains. But many investors have lost significant sums after buying at peak prices just before a market crash. Second, liquidity issues. Smaller cryptos can be particularly challenging to sell. And third, hacks, scams, and mistakes like losing wallet password can lead to irreversible fund losses. And fourth, crypto transactions are irreversible by design, and once a transaction is confirmed, there's no way to undo it. And also, high transaction fees can significantly erode returns. And moving to the right column, And we got lack of regulation. Cryptos are vulnerable to manipulation and fraud. And also, new government policies can spark volatility. And unlike traditional bank accounts, cryptos lack government backing or insurance. There's no FDIC equivalent here. Also, the lack of fundamentals is another challenge. Crypto values are often driven by speculation rather than tangible assets or cash flows. It's difficult to determine their true worth. And also psychological traps also play a significant role. Herd instinct, fear of missing out, or FOMO, and the greater full fallacy can drive irrational behavior. Investors may rush into purchases at inflated prices or hold onto assets and hoping for a bigger payout. Lastly, energy consumption. A single Bitcoin transaction consumes energy equivalent to powering 6 US households for a day. Next, I will pass to my partner, Kate.
Thank you, QY. Building upon your overview of the general risks associated with cryptocurrency investing, I'll now delve deeper into specific examples of fraud and scams. I'll begin with a significant case that our clinic directly handled, Block One, and then walk through 2 additional high-profile scams that illustrate the broader landscape of crypto fraud. Our clinic has direct experience with a landmark cryptocurrency securities fraud case involving Block One, as seen in this slide. And this company conducted initial coin offerings, or ICOs, where it marketed tokens to investors with promises of high returns, while failing to adequately disclose the associated risks or the true nature of the investment. The SEC stepped in and applied the Howey test, which determines whether an asset qualifies as a security. And in this case, Block One's tokens satisfied the test. Investors contributed money to a common enterprise with the expectation of profits derived from the efforts of others, namely Block One's leadership. And as a result, the SEC classified the tokens as securities and initiated enforcement action. And our clinic served as part of the lead plaintiff counsel team representing the interests of defrauded investors. We helped navigate a complex and evolving legal landscape, which is no small task in the still murky world of crypto regulation. Ultimately, the SEC imposed significant penalties and fines on Block One, and investors achieved a partial recovery. But beyond the numbers, this case drove home the urgent need for clear regulatory oversight, stronger transparency requirements, and more robust investor protections in the crypto space. And outside of securities fraud, cryptocurrency investors face a wide range of deceptive schemes, from classic pump and dump operations to Ponzi schemes to entirely fake projects designed to exploit hype and confusion. And I guess this part was already mentioned by another team, so I'll just go over to the next slide. And another and next up is I want to talk about the difficulties of recovering stolen crypto assets and the challenges that we're facing in that regard. First, tracing crypto is inherently difficult. While blockchain transactions are public, the pseudonymity of wallet addresses means it's often unclear who's actually behind them. Second, there are international jurisdictional issues. Once funds are moved across borders, especially into countries with weak enforcement or opaque legal systems, recovery becomes exponentially harder. There are also broader legal and procedural gaps in how current frameworks deal with cross-border fraud. The law hasn't quite caught up to the speed and scale of crypto movement. And in one of our clinic's cases, scammers tricked a victim into transferring $4 million, which was quickly converted into crypto and sent overseas. We collaborated with the US Attorney's Office, which had the tools and authority needed to trace the funds. That partnership led to partial asset recovery, but it also highlighted how difficult full restitution can be. Now, my partner QY will now walk us through the case itself and then the tracing efforts in more detail.
So I'll dive in the case Kay just talked about from our clinic. That shows just how challenging it can be to recover assets after a fraud when crypto is involved. Starting with the case facts, scammers pretending to be federal agents contact a victim and convince him that his identity and immigration status are in jeopardy. They even promise it will be safe and return later with interest. It's a classic con, but it worked. The victim believes he's dealing with legit authorities and authorizes wire transfers to the scammers. Here's where it gets messy. The scammers took that money and converted it to cryptos. Months go by, and it's not until the real FBI knocks on the door that the victim realizes it's a scam. By then, the funds are in deep in the digital wild west. That's where the tracing challenges Kay just talked about come in. First, crypto is pseudonymous, and you can see the transactions on the blockchain, but you cannot see them on the uh, wallet addresses. And second, there's a cross-border scam. So, so the funds went overseas, and the scammers are likely in another country. And third, crypto's transactions are irreversible. Once they're done, there's no calling the bank to hit rewind. And last, the scammers move the funds at a quick speed. Next slide, please. So our starting point of the clinic is figuring out where the money landed after those wire transfers. We use a legal tool called Rule 224 petition, but here's the problem. If scammers converted them to cryptos and spread them out, the trails may become untraceable. That's where collaboration with the US Attorney's Office comes in. Our clinic doesn't have the fancy tech to chase crypto, but they do. They use blockchain analysis tools to track the move the crypto makes. They can pinpoint which exchanges the fund hit. And if we are lucky, freeze those assets before they vanish. In this case, their expertise was a lifesaver. By teaming up, we traced the cryptos and managed to recover part of the stolen funds. Thank you. And any questions?
Yes, well, thank you, Chen-Yu and Kay. Outstanding. I think that was extremely fascinating. I think I will not ask a question again because we are out of time. I would point out that I served for my first 12 years at the SEC, working in our Office of International Affairs, where I coordinated and collaborated with our enforcement staff in trying to recover stolen proceeds of fraud that were transferred overseas, and even working with our jurisdictions that we had tight, close relationships and memorandums of understanding to work together on that. It was extremely difficult. And I think you're pointing out one of these issues that people have to be aware of when dealing with crypto is how incredibly difficult it is to recover the assets, particularly when they're sent overseas. So thank you for that. Well, we will wrap up. I found all three presentations by all three schools extremely fascinating. Rather heartbreaking to hear about some of these scams and the people who have lost their life savings, but very informative and hopefully will help us to understand these issues better and help to encourage us to improve our outreach and education on these issues. So I will again thank you and then turn it over to the next session.
Excellent. Well, hey, thanks so much, Paul. Thanks to all of our presenters. Great work as always. International Affairs is actually where Paul and I met some 10 years ago. So thank you for rejoining the event today. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our CFTC representative. So Melanie DeVoe is the director of the Office of Customer Education and Outreach at the CFTC. She's been there at the CFTC since 2008. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you've also worked at FERC, You've worked at the ATF, and I think you worked in an international law firm as well. Melanie and I actually go back a year, 2, 3 now, and we are very involved in some of the working groups that Melanie set up at the CFTC, and she is very involved in the Interagency Securities Council here at the SEC. So, Melanie, it's a pleasure to welcome you. Thank you for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Adam, and thank you to the SEC for allowing me to speak briefly. The views I'm about to share are my own and not those of anyone at the CFTC. And I just wanted to take an opportunity to kind of show some of the CFTC's resources that are available to the students when you're going out to do your outreach presentations. Adam, can you see the CFTC's Fraud Center on your screen? Yes.
I
Okay,
guess
great.
you can.
Oh, that's great. So, I really have been delighted by all the presentations I've heard, and I'm really proud of all the work the students are doing. And it is very frustrating when you're dealing with these online frauds where the money is moving so rapidly overseas, and it's really hard to help the victim once the money has left. So, what we're focusing on at the CFTC, and we do this frequently in conjunction with the SEC, is to go out to communities and provide information about these frauds. And I know you all are doing the same. So I just want to let you know we have these free resources for you to use. They are on our website, cftc.gov/learn and protect. And we do have some of our materials translated into Spanish and Chinese. So if you're dealing with communities where they speak those languages, we wanted to let you know we have those resources. And a lot of the content here, we do go through the do's and don'ts, more information. But one thing I wanted to point out is we have a series of learning resources, and we basically just discuss, various scams. This is focused on what we call relationship investment scams and what the bad guys call pig butchering. So this is a form of a long-term confidence scam where someone contacts you out of the blue, gains your trust, convinces you that they're your new best friend or love interest, and then basically they ask you if they can help you invest your money. You trust them so much that you give them your money, and then before you know it, it's all gone. So that's the long and short of it. But we do have these materials that you can print out and bring to your outreach events. I also wanted to give you our contact information. You can contact me at mdevoe@cftc.gov or education@cftc.gov if you'd like to connect. We can kind of go through some of the things that we found helpful when we do outreach events. And the number one thing I'm going to share with you is that no one thinks fraud or scams will ever happen to them. So we always try to talk about the subject broadly, like, hey, you might know someone this may happen to. But unfortunately, these romance frauds are happening. Relationship investment scams are happening to a lot of people. FBI had reports of almost 4 billion in losses last year. So very serious stuff. You guys are doing great work. Whatever you can do to get the word out to your community, I'm sure they will be grateful. So thank you very much. And Adam, thank you for the time to let me introduce this to everyone.
Great. And Melanie, thank you. That information was very insightful. Thank you for sharing. Yes, at
Thank
this
you.
time, I would like to introduce Dr. John Sanders, SEC Engagement for the SEC. Yes, he will be moderating the Scam and Financial Frauds panel. Over to you, John.
All right, thank you so much, Jackie. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Leading our Scams and Financial Frauds panel, it's my pleasure to welcome John Rincon, Emily Lopez, and Emily Brothman from the University of Miami School of Law.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. My name is John Rincon. I'm a 2L at the University of Miami. I'm really excited to talk to everybody today with my classmates about third-party scams and the Electronic Funds Transfers Act. I want to apologize if I'm sniffling a little. I'm a little under the weather. But we're going to go through what some of these third-party scams look like, how the way they're orchestrated can make recovery for consumers a little bit difficult, and then some proposals to address that. So let me start with a hypothetical to illustrate this point. And so I want you all to imagine an individual who receives a text message from their bank or from what appears to be their bank. And that text message alerts this individual that there's an unauthorized purchase for hundreds of dollars to their account. And so they reply no to this text message to deny that charge. And then after replying, they receive an automated text message which says a bank representative is going to contact you shortly. And they do. Somebody calls them. That call comes quickly after that. The call comes and it has the bank's caller ID on it. And this individual answers the phone. The representative is very friendly. They're there to help them. And then they begin and they start asking for their information. And again, this individual, believing it's the bank, they offer it to them. They want the bank to help them. They offer their username, their password, and then they're told that the matter has been dealt with. But then after the phone call ends, they receive an email that hundreds or thousands of dollars have been wired from their account to some distant account in another state. And so what this scenario is it's a kind of social engineering attack that is termed phishing. And so broadly, what social engineering is this tactic where fraudsters manipulate people in order to steal their information by using psychological tactics, deceptive tactics, or in particular urgency, like in this one. And so for our purposes, what I really want to talk about is phishing in particular, because it is relevant because of the role that the consumer plays to EFTA. And what I'll say about phishing is that it is incredibly common. The FBI took a look at phishing in a report that they published in 2023. It's called the IC3 report, where they noted that there were over 298,000 reports of phishing in 2023 alone, which in fact was down from the year before. The year before had about 300,000. This is an exceedingly common kind of attack that can happen. And then there's a variation of this, which is smishing, which is essentially the same thing, but through text message. And the scenario that I posed at the beginning of this presentation has a flavor of both in that case, right? The individual receives a text message, but they also receive a call. And these, can be problematic for many reasons. And so the last thing I want to mention is that there is an important distinction between this process as it occurs in that scenario where it culminates in a wire transfer and how that might differ from Zelle or any peer-to-peer transaction where the fraud culminates in somebody sending money directly to somebody else. And so there's really a sense in which, depending on which one occurs, the protections can differ, but despite which one it is, because the consumer is sort of deceived, that can make recovery difficult for them in many respects. And so I'm going to turn it over to my classmate, Emily Lopez, who's going to talk about that recovery now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Lopez, and I am a 2L at the University of Miami School of Law. I really want to talk today about why reimbursement is unlikely under the current law and the regulatory scheme we have for fraud. And this really comes down to the distinction between unauthorized transfers and transfers that are induced. So, for those unfamiliar with this, unauthorized transfers are those that are initiated without the account holder's knowledge or consent. So, for example, when a scammer gains access by hacking, and then moves money without the victim doing anything. These transfers are going to be covered by the Electronic Funds Transfer Act, and banks are generally required to reimburse consumers. However, induced transfers or transfers in which the consumer is voluntarily initiating them, typically, like John mentioned, often under deception or fraud, like a scammer posing as a bank representative or a romantic partner. So when the consumer is contributory negligent, these are not going to be covered by EFTA. So banks are going to deny reimbursement 9 times out of 10. And like I said, banks are really drawing the line by relying on this very narrow definition of the Electronic Fund Transfers Act of unauthorized. So if you click the button or you send the wire, it's going to be considered authorized, even if you were deceived into doing so. The result of this is that victims of scams involving induced transfers are usually left in the dark with no reimbursement. Wire transfers are used in billions of dollars of fraud annually, and this is a really big issue. But wire transfers aren't covered by EFTA. They actually fall under UCC Article 4A, which uses a commercially reasonable security procedure standard. This is a very low bar. As long as the bank follows basic protocols, such as a password or two-factor authentication, they're going to be off the hook, especially if the consumer agrees to this security measure, which typically consumers don't review the very complex contracts when they open accounts. So even frauds that are thousands of dollars going to a different state are not going to trigger reimbursement unless the bank was blatantly sloppy or didn't follow the consumer's agreed procedure. So I want to talk about something that the government has done to sort of help these victims of fraud. And it's the legal guidance from the IRS as to whether victims of scams can deduct their losses on their taxes under Internal Revenue Code Section 165, which deals specifically with casualty and theft losses. So the core question here really is, if people got scammed in 2024, whether this was by romance scams, a fake investment platform, fake bank employees, or even phishing emails, can they claim these stolen funds as a deductible loss on their 2024 taxes? And like everything in law school, the answer to this is sort of it depends. So it's going to be a yes if the loss comes from theft under state law, such as fraud or embezzlement. If the taxpayer enters the scam thinking it's a way to make money, such as investing in crypto or moving money between different accounts, and if there's no real chance of getting this money back by the end of the year. Those losses, if they meet that criteria, can be deducted in 2024, but only up to the amount of money originally invested. We're not going to account for any expected profits. However, if the scam was personal in nature, such as a romance scam or a fake kidnapping scam, essentially where profit isn't the primary motive, these are going to be considered personal casualty losses, which are not allowed for tax years 2018 through 2025 under Trump-era tax law. So essentially, with this sort of guidance, the type of individuals that are going to be recovering are those suffering from fake bank employee scams, crypto investment scams like pig butchering, or phishing, as long as profit is the primary motivation. I'm going to go ahead and hand this off to my friend Emily Brathman, who is going to be talking about some proposals to better protect consumers in this situation.
Hi everyone, my name is Emily Brathman. I'm a 2L at UMiami Law, and I'm going to be talking about some EFTA reforms. But before I do, I think it would be helpful to look at how the UK has begun to tackle this issue. So the UK has rolled out a regulatory framework for what they call authorized push payment fraud, or APP fraud, and this is when a consumer is coerced, tricked, or manipulated into sending money from their own account to a fraudster. Now, although this payment is technically authorized by the consumer, UK law recognizes that the authorization was not truly voluntary because it was secured through deception. So, under these rules, banks must reimburse victims of APP fraud unless the consumer acted with gross negligence. So, this would be a case where the consumer repeatedly ignored fraud alerts. The reimbursement is subject to a 50-50 shared liability between the sending and receiving bank to ensure that both sides of the transaction have incentives to monitor for fraud. A great thing about this policy is that it also applies to UK's equivalent platforms of Zelle and Venmo. So this UK model proves that with the right incentives, banks, platforms, and regulators can collaborate to reduce scam losses and make digital payments safer without undermining innovation or speed. So now, how do we handle this? Well, our core proposal is to expand the definition of unauthorized electronic fund transfers under EFTA, or at the very least, clarify it through regulatory guidance. So, as it stands, EFTA does not clearly protect consumers when they are tricked into initiating the transfer themselves, for example, through phishing or smishing fraud schemes that John had previously talked about. The issue lies in that the victims authorize the transfers themselves, but as we know, this consent is not informed and it's not voluntary because they were deceived. Therefore, we propose updating the definition of unauthorized EFT under EFTA to explicitly include transfers fraudulently induced through third-party deception or social engineering, even if the consumer is the one to initiate the transaction. And with this definition change, we also urge the following reforms. So first, borrowing from the UK's APP fraud framework, we propose a shared liability between the consumers, banks, and payment platforms, so that when the fraud occurs, and despite reasonable consumer caution, the burden does not fall solely on the victim. Secondly, we proposed enhanced duties for banks and payment platforms like Zelle and Venmo, who are uniquely vulnerable due to their speed and irreversibility of their transactions. So we propose that these banks and platforms be required to first educate consumers with embedded warnings and real-time alerts about fraud risks. Second, delay or flag high risk or unusual transactions and require consumers to give additional verification for high volume transfers. And third, deploy AI tools to detect red flags, such as transfers initiated by newly added contacts to the consumer's account, strange IP logins, or messages referencing urgent wire transfers. By monetizing EFTA and adapting its scope to include these fraudulently induced consumer-initiated transfers, we shift from a blame-based model more to a prevention-based one, and ultimately that means fewer victims and smarter, safer systems. So with that, we thank you all for listening, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thank you for a very insightful presentation, John, Emily, and Emily. Please keep up the amazing work that you're doing. Joining me now is Mary Elbeck, Matt Pitano, and Epi Jonas, representing St. John's University School of Law.
You ready?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We would like to thank the SEC for hosting this summit. And today we are going to be speaking about protecting and educating investors vulnerable to third-party investment scams in the era of loneliness, social media, and artificial intelligence. So a little bit about us. We are the St. John's University Securities Arbitration Clinic. Our clinic represents underserved investors in FINRA broker-dealer disputes, as well as initiatives in securities policy by writing comment letters to the SEC. So just a little bit of background in the common types of third-party investment scams we'll discuss today are romance scams, the pig butchering scams, affinity fraud, and AI-assisted phishing. We think that romance scams are particularly relevant to today's conversation about the securities landscape and fraud because in 2023, the United States Surgeon General declared America's problem with loneliness an epidemic. And who is lonely is not necessarily who you might expect. 29% of people between the ages of 30 and 44 years of age said they were frequently or always lonely. 24% of 18 to 29-year-olds reported serious feelings of loneliness. 20% of 45 to 64-year-olds reported serious feelings of loneliness. And the group that reported Loneliness in the lowest rates was actually adults aged 65 and older, as 10% felt lonely. So in a romance scam, scammers will take advantage of this loneliness and use the illusion of a romantic or close relationship to manipulate their victim. They will often first interact with their victims on accident by either pretending to text the wrong number or pretending to connect with the wrong party on social media. However, these romance scams are not strictly limited to being online. In our client's experience, the client was recently widowed and had no children or dependents, and she entered a relationship with an individual after several chance meetings at a local store, and while the individual actually approached her while she was bedridden in a hospital. The individual convinced our client to open a brokerage account at a firm where the client believes that the individual was working with the broker to maximize trades on the client's account. The individual then became the client's partner, moved into the client's home, and began hiding her mail, which included, amongst other things, trade confirmations related to the account. In the online version, a so-called pig butchering scam typically operates by reaching out via text message, but increasingly on dating apps, social media, or WhatsApp, and will provide an unusual explanation for the contact. They may come across as wanting to develop a genuine friendship, a romantic relationship, capitalizing off of this loneliness. They'll build a relationship and foster trust, and then encourage the victim to purchase or transfer cryptocurrency assets or to make other investments. And within these pig butchering scams, there have been a broad range of victims. We've seen reports of everyone from college students to medical doctors. What we've experienced in our clinic is that we had a caller who reached out after losing money in an investment scam. And the caller was initially approached on social media from a person that she follows on several platforms. And the caller had purchased digital marketing courses from this person in the past and didn't think twice when she was direct messaged by her about an opportunity to invest in crypto assets. And once the caller mentioned that she was interested, the scammer sent her a link to a website and walked her through how to deposit Bitcoin into an investment account on the scammer's website. After this initial deposit, the caller was pressured to transfer more money into this investment account, which purported to show large amounts of interest generated from the deposited Bitcoin. And after depositing a few $1,000s more, the caller was informed that they were now eligible for a premium account and introduced to senior financial advisors who convinced her to invest even more. Shortly after, she was informed that her account will be liquidated unless she deposited another almost $350,000 into Bitcoin, and she borrowed from her family to do so. In all, this victim was scammed out of over $800,000 before realizing the nature of her situation and contacting the relevant authorities. Unfortunately, the dollar amounts in this case were too large for our clinic to take on, but this is just an example of what is out there.
Another example of scams that take advantage of the loneliness that Mary Beth was just talking about and the general desire of people to connect with one another is affinity fraud. Affinity fraud features fraudsters who purport or are actual members of the group of their intended victims. They could be anything from a common racial or ethnic group to members of certain religious or professional organizations, like veterans groups, for example. It preys upon the assumption that members of these groups will trust other members of these groups more than a stranger, and they'll be less likely to seek help from law enforcement because they wouldn't want to aid in the prosecution of another member of this group that they feel they have a commonality with the scammer. And that commonality helps them bridge the connection that makes this similar to affinity fraud and romance scams, where the scammer tries to reach out and establish a connection and leverage that to the detriment of the victim. An example of this in our clinic was a Russian-speaking immigrant who called from the former Soviet Union. She came across an investment opportunity advertised on Facebook in Russian while she was stuck at home on disability. And when she inquired further, she was contacted by two representatives of the alleged investment project via Telegram, which is another end-to-end encrypted messaging platform that is often used by, similar to WhatsApp, people from other countries. So it feels like, oh, another Russian-speaking person using something that I used to speak with my family back home. The representative spoke and texted with her in Russian and gained her trust and convinced her to invest a total of $40,000 before she realized that she was being scammed. And in this case, it would also helped because of the fact that she was stuck at home and a victim of the increasing loneliness that a lot of the country is feeling.
Thank you, Abby. And so the third umbrella of scams we're talking about today are AI-assisted scams. So the rise in AI in recent years has brought enormous promise to improve everything from healthcare to education to even the workflow of businesses. Unfortunately, however, it's also proven to be a very useful tool for bad actors. And the Cornell team did a great job of explaining this in more detail, but giving you guys a quick overview. There's the creation of deepfake videos and audio, which can impersonate investment professionals or even family members of victims, as well as this AI-assisted spread of false information in online ads, fake news coverage, which has been used to drive stock prices or target unsuspecting victims. And one especially useful tool for these scammers is AI-assisted phishing. So what is AI-assisted phishing? Well, traditionally, phishing is a practice by which a scammer will use a fraudulent email or a text or website to trick unsuspecting victims into revealing personal information. Now, frequently, these scammers use the names of real companies or even actual employees in these schemes. And recently, we've seen scammers expand this traditional practice by using AI to reach a wider pool of unsuspecting victims and bolster this appearance of legitimacy. One particularly chilling example of this that we've seen in our clinic concerns a caller who was an older man and accidentally locked out of his brokerage trading account. Now, unfortunately, he didn't know the phone number offhand of this brokerage support number. So he performed a Google search, as many people do. And upon doing so, he was given a phone number by Google's AI overview at the top of his screen and called it, assuming this number was accurate. After all, this was Google. Their AI wouldn't get something wrong like this, right? Well, the caller got through this supposed customer support and was further reassured when people on the other end exhibited intimate knowledge of his problem, the brokerage, and other pertinent information. And they assured him they can take care of everything. All he had to do was give them his account information, download a screen sharing app so they can monitor his progress, and he'll be well on his way. But here's the thing. The number actually belonged to a group of scammers, not Robinhood, not this brokerage customer support. In total, he lost over 5 figures before realizing that he was being scammed and finally connecting with the actual brokerage's customer support.
So what can be done to raise awareness and help educate and protect these investors vulnerable to these third-party scams? One thing we want to focus on is expanding education and outreach, as other teams have said today, including teaching people about the common traits among scams, like the fact that they're offering you something too good to be true, and they're pressuring or making the potential investor feel uncomfortable or like they're being stressed about the potential to make money when they weren't even the one reaching out. So getting people more aware of these red flags to be aware of, and of the more common types of scams outside of the ones that we mentioned today. And additionally, we would want to focus on reducing the stigma and shame to encourage victims to reach out and seek help. And one thing that can be done about that is focusing on victim-centered language. A Better Business Bureau study found that 35.7% of scam victims report feeling shame and embarrassment, and that just leads to underreporting and less effective regulation, as well as the proliferation of more scams, because no one's going to the authority. No, not no one, but less people than should be are going to the authorities. There's a push by experts to engage with victims using language that will not re-traumatize them or cause them to feel additional shame or emotional turmoil. Terms like pig butchering, for example, can cause victims to feel like a fool or feel as if this was their fault. And we want to start steering away from language like that, as well as expand the use of clinics so that more people are aware of these scams and aware of the resources they have if they have been affected by these. St. John's Securities Arbitration Clinic has investor seminars. Last year we worked with seniors, and this year we did one with veterans, and we want to keep doing things like that in the future and support other clinics doing those. Thank you. Any questions?
Wow, great presentation. I'm particularly intrigued by the part that you were talking about as far as language and not re-traumatizing victims. You talked about a couple of different efforts. Are there any other things that are taking place to reduce the stigma?
Yeah, thank you, John, and that's a great question. So one thing we've come across in our research, and hopefully you've noticed, whenever we've heard of pig butchering in our presentation, it's been in quotation marks, because we recognize that there's been a push to move past this term. And one group in particular that's been kind of at the forefront of this is Interpol. And they're right now engaged in a campaign to rebrand this romance baiting. Problem is, that's a term that we're not all familiar with. And so pig butchering, even if it is not the most victim-centric and maybe not the most descriptive, it's something we all kind of automatically understand. So that being said, we understand that these things take time, and we're confident that with more summits like this, more speaking engagements, and getting the word out, we'll be able to move past some of this more harmful language into more victim-centric language. And like Epi said, this will help victims feel more comfortable to come forward and not feel the same shame attached to this.
Absolutely. Yeah, because you can have somebody that experiences that type of trauma and then have it happen over again from how the process is with reporting it. So thank you so much for sharing that. Thanks again, Mary, Epi, and Max. Overall, fantastic presentation. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right. So closing out our panel, we have Jonathan Bluffstein, Marco Caprioni, Luca Ritz, and Derek Wafer from the Elizabeth Hall School of Law at Pace University.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Luca Ritz, and I'm joined here by my fellow student interns from the Fairbridge Investor Rights Clinic at Pace University Law School. Today, we'll be discussing the specific challenges of working with people who have been scammed by fraudsters. As we will see, the difficulty lies in the absence of a convenient forum, the particular risks created by certain non-FINRA arbitration agreements, and identifying a legal theory that will provide a right to recovery.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jonathan Bluffstein. For the 24-25 academic year, the clinic received and responded to a total of 21 inquiries. Notably, only 2 of the inquiries we received have been traditional investor disputes with broker-dealers. We've noticed that most of the cases we have been receiving involve individuals who have been scammed and defrauded. We have seen a pattern of 2 types of fraud cases, affinity fraud and romance fraud, and there's a trend of victims being contacted through WhatsApp and Telegram. The fraudsters will typically find some common ground with the victims and then introduce the idea of investing.
So today we're going to talk about 3 cases, the facts, their challenges, and what can be done. So Jonathan is going to start first, and he's going to discuss case A.
A victim was contacted via WhatsApp by who he believed to be a representative for a cryptocurrency trading platform. The fraudsters directed him to a website where he could watch his investments grow. Over the course of a few weeks, our client sent 4 wire transfers through U.S. banks totaling $185,000. What was most striking about this is that the fraudsters had convinced him to take out additional bank loans to finance these investments. Believing that there had already been significant growth, our client notified the fraudster that he needed to withdraw $180,000 temporarily. At first, the fraudster told him that it would take a few days, but after some time had passed, they stopped responding altogether, and the domain of the trading platform that he had been using to watch his trades grow had disappeared. When we received the inquiry, we conducted a domain search and discovered that multiple domains had been purchased for this fictitious cryptocurrency trading platform. There was no registered firm by the name and no record of a fraudster being registered with FINRA.
And Jonathan, what were the challenges in providing recovery in that case, and what can regulators do to help?
So there were a few challenges in this case that inhibited our ability to assist the victim. First, they didn't live in New York. And second, and most important, it was a fictitious trading platform, and there was no avenue to track down the scammer. There's no documentation, no subpoena, and there was no other way to go after him. Given that the fictitious cryptocurrency trading platform is not registered with FINRA, his claims can't be arbitrated. In situations like these, we're given the opportunity to take on an advisory role for these victims. The FBI has a helpline and complaint process where the victim filed a complaint, and similarly, we advise victims to reach out to district attorneys' offices and state attorney general's offices. They have established assistance programs to victims of financial crimes such as scams. Another option is informing victims about new IRS guidance that the Miami University mentioned earlier. Victims of different scams, including pig butchering, may deduct these losses under Section 165. However, it is only a partial remedy because it will be a fraction of what they have lost, and it doesn't mean that it won't make them whole or bring the perpetrator to justice. Now, how can registrars such as the SEC, FINRA, and the CFTC help? An important step that needs to be taken is updating how we are defining fraud, specifically affinity fraud. This includes publishing literature that is used to advise the public on common scams, such as pig butchering. Language surrounding affinity fraud centers around Ponzi and pyramid schemes. And while this is certainly true, especially with traditional modes of investing, there's a shift happening with the rise of cryptocurrency trading. This is now where we see most fraud is occurring. Victims are conducting internet searches and discovering that they'd fallen victims to scams through websites such as Reddit. They're seeing Reddit pages complete with testimonies from people who have fallen victim to the same scams. The internet is the first place people are going for help, which is why we need to update how we are discussing fraud to include cryptocurrency trading and scams such as pig butchering.
Thank you. Now, Marco, the clinic also received cases involving romance fraud. So can you tell us more about that?
Thank you. My name is Marco Caprioni. Thank you guys for the introduction. As just mentioned, along with affinity frauds, we saw a case of a romance fraud. Here, a victim was contacted via text message by a former romantic partner where he was offered a high-yield investment opportunity. The scammer claimed she was an investment advisor and that she had an effective trading strategy. In total, the victim invested $90,000, $30,000 on 3 separate occasions. The perpetrator would send monthly statements to the victim, which were in the form of an Excel spreadsheet, which indicated good returns. However, these spreadsheets did not have a list of the specific stocks invested in, and from our standpoint looking at it, it was different than a normal securities account. What's also worth noting here is that the victim had investment experience and other investment accounts. He was assured multiple times that his investments were good, doing well, and safe. When the victim asked the scammer to close his account, approaching retirement, he wanted the funds returned, and she refused to do so. It became known to the victim that he was one of many, as he was able to find other victims from the same scammer across multiple states. So in terms of the timeline here with the victim, before he contacted us, he did contact the police. They told him that it was a civil matter. And when he came to us, he did have viable civil causes of action. However, because of the long waiting period in between, and the fact that it was difficult to find out where the scammer lives, and if we filed a lawsuit, get an injunction, work backwards from the bank, pay a subpoena, by that time the money is gone and the case grows stale. He then went to the New York AG's office and they said they would open a case. However, authorities' interest doesn't necessarily mean you'll get a recovery.
Speaking of recovery, Marco, what were the challenges in providing recovery?
Sure. So some of the major challenges, number one, including the scammer was not a registered representative, so we couldn't submit a claim through FINRA. With regard to the Electronic Fund Transfer Act, this wouldn't apply in this instance because there's no electronic financial transfer and she wasn't a financial institution. And again, just to reiterate, with filing a civil complaint for fraud, it was difficult to find the address for the scammer, making it hard to serve her. But even if we were to serve her, we're unsure if she can even satisfy a judgment because, in all likelihood, she moved the money out of the account. In terms of the legal theories applying to this case matter, the challenge isn't necessarily applying the facts to the law. It's the inability to obtain immediate relief and satisfy a judgment. So to conclude with this case specifically, the victim did have investment experience, and it is unfortunate that situations like this can really happen to anyone. The two had a previous romantic relationship, and it again goes to show how anyone could be vulnerable in a situation like this.
So, lastly, one of our clients experienced both affinity fraud and romance fraud. So, Derek, can you explain what happened in case C?
Hello, my name is Derek Wafer, and this client developed an online romantic relationship via WhatsApp with a scammer who bonded with her over her immigration. The scammer convinced her to invest in cryptocurrency via a large cryptocurrency trading platform. She invested $22,000. This was all of her savings, and she planned to use this to send it back to her family abroad. The scammer then utilized a flawed feature within the platform to trick our client into transferring her cryptocurrency into the scammer's wallet. All the while, our client was under the impression that they were still within the trading platform, buying and selling cryptocurrency, making profits. The scammer utilized a pig butchering style scam, which was extraordinarily similar to a mass arbitration filed by over 100 victims who were taken advantage due to the same security flaw in the platform. The mass arbitration alleged damages of millions of dollars, but the confidential nature of the arbitration assisted the platform in hiding its security flaws, which our client over a year later was scammed by using it. Our client attempted to withdraw their profits, and the scammer informed them that they would have to pay fake taxes to withdraw the money. She soon realized that this was a scam and attempted to withdraw her funds in any way possible. After failing to do so, she reached out to our clinic.
So, again, Derek, I'm going to pose the same question. What were the challenges faced in trying to find a recovery?
As previously mentioned, one of the major challenges was the scammer being out of our reach. The students before us did find a mass amount of information regarding the bank account, and it was a bank account in California, which is clearly out of our jurisdiction, and there's no clinics in California. From there, we transitioned our focus to the cryptocurrency trading platform. And this platform, like many others, takes fees from the trades and therefore profits on just about every transaction. Therefore, these platforms effectively were assisting the scammers in carrying out their schemes. By holding the platforms liable to identify these individuals who stole money, it would be greatly beneficial to victims. Another hurdle we faced was the user agreement. The user agreement that all users agree to when they make their accounts poses a great problem. This company required users to make a series of requests or complaints before formally filing for AAA arbitration. The platform further did not make the complaint process easy to find and has strict requirements to fulfill these steps in the process. Another issue was the ETFA. As previously mentioned by Miami, there are extensive difficulties in applying EFTA to accounts of this type. However, this platform implied that their accounts are financial accounts, yet they did not provide a refund in accordance with the act and hid the contact information in their user agreement, making the complaint process challenging to initiate.
And so we're sort of given the unique nature of this case, how can other clinics help in these kinds of situations?
Other clinics can focus on the platforms the scammers are using to effectuate their scams. So generally, investor rights clinics will not have the ability to deal with criminal issues, and it's best to focus on what's in our scope. So they should focus on things such as FINRA arbitrations, SEC and state securities complaints, bank or financial institutions disputes, and regulatory guidance such as reporting scams to consumer protection agencies and financial regulators. In terms of ineligible victims, clinics can provide ineligible victims with assistance in finding resources to help them, such as information regarding what we've experienced in similar situations, referrals to authorities, pro bono legal services, or nonprofit organizations, direct them to self-help legal resources, work with banks or credit card companies to reverse fraudulent transactions, or identify if ineligible victims can join an ongoing lawsuit, such as a class action or group litigation.
Thank you, everyone. So it is clear from my colleagues and the other speakers that scams do not look the same way they did a few years ago. And it's clear that anyone, even those who are financially literate, can fall victim. There are significant obstacles in obtaining recovery and a lack of initiative from established cryptocurrency trading platforms to protect investors, which leads to a higher risk of people falling victim to scams such as pig butchering. But there are things that can be done, including holding these platforms accountable, educating the public, and advising investors who come to our clinics that may not otherwise qualify for our assistance. It is important that we, as legal professionals, adapt how we provide legal assistance in this ever-changing landscape. We need to evolve how we talk and educate around scams, specifically regarding crypto. Thank you for listening, and thank you for the SEC for giving us this opportunity to speak.
All right. Thank you so much, Jonathan, Marco, Luca, and Derek, for this very relevant presentation and all the work that you're doing to help victims of scams. I also like how you highlighted the need for more investor clinics. We have a couple of minutes before the chairman joins. And one of the things that stood out to me, you talked about the difference of how Ponzi and pyramid schemes are treated compared to romance and affinity scams. Can you elaborate a little more on that and what you're seeing?
Sure. So traditional investors, they would see fraud cases like this occur with Ponzi schemes and in pyramid schemes. But now, because of the digital world that we live in, everything is happening through cryptocurrency. A lot of the scams we're seeing now are all crypto-based rather than in-person scams like Ponzi or pyramid schemes that traditionally used to affect small investors like the clients that we see here in our clinics.
Any additional thoughts on that topic? If not, if you could talk briefly about some of the ways that we could hold some of the platforms accountable.
One way that we could hold the platforms accountable was to help identify the scammers who the victims fell prey to, and by identifying these scammers, it takes a step that we can't do, and it's more in the criminal side and can actually identify people versus us just going after the platform itself.
Fantastic. Again, thank you so much for the presentation. I believe that we have the chairman joining now. So with that in mind, I just want to, again, this concludes the Scams and Financial Frauds panel. Again, I'd like to thank the amazing presenters from the University of Miami School of Law, St. John's University School of Law, and the Elizabeth Hall School of Law at Pace University. It was truly my pleasure to work with each of you and your professors. I now turn it back over to you, Adam.
Great. Well, hey, thanks so much, John. Wonderful presentations from everybody. I mean, I thought the presentations all day today were great. They were well thought out. They had nice, thoughtful dialogue. We heard from more than 30 students from 10 different clinics, 2 SEC divisions and offices, and 2 federal agencies today. So everybody should be really proud of themselves for the work, the effort, and the capability that they brought to today's event. I know we covered topics: finfluencers, self-directed accounts, investor education, case studies, defining your career path, cyber and emerging tech, frauds, capital formation, so on. It was really exciting, really insightful today. But now it's my pleasure to pivot to our chairman, Mr. Mark Ueda, to close us out. He has been an advocate for investors and a true supporter of protecting investors from fraud while also ensuring that they have the freedom and the capability to make those investment choices that are the best for them and their financial futures. I personally appreciate the chairman because he always shows up for investors. He's traveled with us out of state to different roundtables to meet directly with the public, speaking with investors who've been defrauded and hearing about the issues that are of importance to them. So, sir, thank you for joining us today and welcome to the Law Clinic Summit. The floor is yours. Sir, we can't hear you. I think you may be on mute, sir. Hey, sir, welcome. I think you had logged in twice, maybe some technical difficulties on our end. Apologize.
Oh, no, that's okay. Can you hear me now? Hear me?
We can. Hey, I said great things about you. I gave you a wonderful introduction, and you just happened to miss it. So, welcome, sir. And we had a great day today. We got 60 or so people who are on the line, plus everybody on the SEC View. And I just can't thank you enough for making time for this group today.
Oh, no. Well, I'm happy to do it, Adam. And thank you and to all the presenters for all the efforts that you put in today. And apologize. I was a little bit worried there. I thought my WebEx here was not going to work. So glad that brief moment of panic when all of a sudden buttons aren't working and video's not coming up. So anyway, thank you very much. And thanks for everyone's patience. Good afternoon. And it's a pleasure to speak with you today. So I particularly want to thank all of our staff in the SEC's Office of the Investor Advocate for putting on today's event. I'm also glad to be presenting here alongside fellow regulators from the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, law school clinics from around the country, and my fellow SEC colleagues. I want to give an especially warm welcome to the law students in the audience who have made time to participate in the investor advocacy clinics. And thank you as well to all of the clinic affiliated members of the audience for your tireless work on behalf of your clients and the valuable perspective that you provide to our agency. In 1997, then SEC Chairman Arthur Levitt announced this initiative, and he said at the time, these clinics will help small investors who have nowhere else to turn by providing them with high quality legal representation. It's a win-win proposition. Small investors get much needed legal assistance, and students gain valuable learning experience. Now, years later, investor advocacy clinics have far exceeded Chairman Levitt's expectations. To date, clinics like these have represented hundreds of investors and recovered millions of dollars on their behalf. Today's summit featured a number of presentations and panels. One of the panels earlier today addressed emerging risks to younger investors. As technology continues to advance, there will be new opportunities to confuse and defraud investors. We often hear about fraud targeting people entering their golden years, but as we spend more and more time online or on our phones, the risks are growing for everyone, including younger investors. We should be skeptical of anything we see or hear on social media, no matter the topic, and that includes securities and investing. For example, so-called finfluencers may push certain investment products without disclosing their conflicts of interest or actual experience with the product. Investors should consider the source of information they consume and not let the opinions of others take the place of their own research. The SEC's website, investor.gov, is a good source of information and education. Finally, for the law students in the audience, this year marks a personal milestone for me. This is my 30th year of legal practice. That might seem like a very long time. Indeed, maybe even an eternity. But trust me, time flies. I began my career in private practice in both Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles, served as a state securities regulator in California, and joined the commission in 2006. I know one of the things that you've been talking about is investing, and I'll tell you, when I made my first investment, just after graduating law school and putting money in my opening up an individual retirement account, it was all done by mail. How things have changed since then. Now, I've had many roles at the commission, on the staff, working in commissioners' offices, being a commissioner myself, and now serving as the acting chairman. And along the way, I served details being temporarily loaned out to other government agencies, including the Department of the Treasury, the Department of Labor, and the Senate Banking Committee. Each of these experiences contributed to my development as a lawyer and how I think about the law, but also how to think about being a manager and a leader. As you progress through your own careers, I encourage you to be open to new and different opportunities, including public service. And who knows, someday you might be standing up here speaking to a different group of law students. So again, thank you for all your participation, for your interest in investments and investors and protecting the public. So thanks, Adam, and I'll back to you.
Well, sir, thank you so much. That concludes our summit for today. Thank you, everyone, for participating, Mr. Chairman, all of our distinguished guests and presenters, but most of all, our audience members and the students who showed up today. You guys are incredible. You have bright futures ahead of you, and I look forward to staying in touch and working with you all in the future. So best wishes on behalf of the Office of the Investor Advocate, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the entire team on the call today. Thank you and good luck. Take care, everyone.